Her left hand was paralyzed for a year. One silver fork proved she was lying. Vanessa Sterling was untouchable, the ice queen of New York, fiancée of the city's most feared mafia boss, a 10-carat diamond on her finger, billions at her feet. Everyone feared her. Everyone obeyed her. Everyone believed her. For 12 months, she claimed nerve damage destroyed her left hand. She couldn't grip a fork. She couldn't lift a glass. Her fiancé cut her steak every single night. But here's what no one knew. That paralyzed hand was signing secret documents, transferring millions, and preparing poison for the man who trusted her with his heart. She had already killed 3 husbands before him. The only person who noticed? A 24-year-old waitress named Sarah, drowning in her father's gambling debts, invisible to everyone in that room. She saw what no one else did, a hand that moved too fast, a sip that was never swallowed. What you're about to hear is how one server, armed with nothing but a silver fork and the truth, brought down one of the most dangerous Black Widows in American history. This story will remind you, the most powerful weapon isn't money, beauty, or status. It's the ability to see the truth when everyone else is blinded by lies. And sometimes, the people society ignores are the only ones who can save us. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or overlooked, this story is for you. Stay until the end. The rain falling on Tribeca did nothing to cleanse the city's grit. It only intensified the glare of neon lights on the slick, wet streets. Inside Loro, Manhattan's most exclusive Italian dining establishment, the atmosphere was different. It was crisp, fragrant with expensive truffle oil and a thick, unspoken tension. Sarah's fingers were bone white from how tightly she clutched the silver serving tray. She caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the dark glass of the swinging kitchen door. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her apron was immaculate, but her eyes held a profound weariness. At just 24 years old, she was pulling double shifts, desperately trying to settle the gambling debts her father had left behind. And this evening was the one she had been dreading for the entire week. Mr. Ritchie, the manager, hissed at her, his voice a strained whisper as he mopped sweat from his shining scalp. Table 4 just arrived. You will not take a breath unless they permit you. You will not look Mr. Moretti in the eye. And for the love of everything holy, Sarah, you will not do anything to upset her. He never had to speak her name. Vanessa Sterling. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath the second the massive oak doors swung inward. The very oxygen in the air felt like it had been stolen away. 2 enormous bodyguards were the first to enter, wearing suits that cost more than Sarah had earned in her entire life. Then, Dante Moretti followed. He was nothing like the brutal figure the tabloids painted him to be. Dante did not carry himself like a common criminal. He moved with the quiet confidence of royalty. He was dressed in a charcoal Brioni suit that fit him flawlessly. His dark hair was styled back from a face that was a study in cold, dangerous intelligence. This was the man who held the shipping docks, the unions, and a vast portion of New York real estate in his hands. And yet, he walked with an understated elegance. But every single eye in the room was fixed on the woman attached to his arm. Vanessa Sterling was beautiful. There was no denying it, but her beauty was sharp and artificial. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe knot, diamonds glittered at her ears, and a contemptuous sneer seemed to be a permanent feature on her painted red lips. She moved with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on an ornate, custom-designed cane that featured a large pearl handle. "My leg is acting up, Dante," she complained, her voice sharp and loud enough to make the jazz pianist in the corner falter. "This floor is dangerously slippery. Did the staff even bother to clean it? Or is their goal to have me fall and die before our wedding?" Dante's stone-like expression remained unchanged, though he did tighten his grip on her arm, offering more stability. "It is marble, Vanessa. It has been polished. Just walk carefully." She snapped back at him. "I cannot believe you are forcing me to eat in this place." She then flung her expensive coat at a young busboy without even glancing in his direction. It smells of garlic and desperation in here. Sarah drew in a slow, steadying breath. As the head waitress for the exclusive VIP section, she was experienced. She had managed arrogant Wall Street bankers and intoxicated senators with ease. She told herself she could certainly handle a Mafia kingpin's fiancé. With practiced, graceful movements, she approached their table and placed the heavy menus down. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti. Miss Sterling, it is a pleasure to welcome you back to Loro. May I begin by offering you some water?" Vanessa immediately cut her off, her eyes never leaving the bright screen of her phone. "Sparkling. It must be room temperature. And if I notice a single bubble that appears overly aggressive, I will be sending it back immediately. Also, you need to change this napkin. It feels like it is made of sandpaper." For a brief moment, Sarah froze. The napkin was 100% pure Egyptian cotton, the finest available. "Of course, ma'am. Right away." It was then that Dante finally looked up. His eyes were a deep, dark shade, nearly black, and for a fleeting second, they met Sarah's. There was no menace in his gaze, only a profound and weary curiosity. He looked like a man hopelessly confined within a cage of his own design. "Your name is Sarah, is it not?" Dante asked, his voice unexpectedly low and raspy. Sarah felt a chill. He knew her name. "Yes, sir, it is." "Ignore the complaint about the napkin. It is fine," Dante said, dismissing the issue with a small wave of his hand. "Just bring us the wine list. We will have the Bulgari from 1996. Vanessa slammed her phone down hard onto the table. The sharp crack echoed through the now completely silent restaurant. "Excuse me? Are you actively undermining my authority in front of the staff? In front of this nobody?" Dante's jaw visibly tightened. "I am simply trying to have a quiet dinner, Vanessa." She leaned forward, her voice a venomous hiss. "I am the future Mrs. Moretti. When I declare that the napkin feels like sandpaper, then it is sandpaper. And you," she shifted her furious glare directly onto Sarah, "stop staring at my fiancé. I know exactly what you are thinking. Do you believe you can flutter your eyelashes and charm him into giving you a bigger tip? You are nothing but dirt. Now go and get me my water." Sarah immediately lowered her head and retreated toward the kitchen, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. "She is so much worse tonight. She is on another level tonight," Rocco, the sous chef, whispered as he carefully arranged an appetizer on a plate. "The word going around is that the wedding is scheduled for next month. She is feeling the pressure because Dante still has not signed the prenuptial agreement. She is desperate to lock him down." Sarah muttered under her breath, "She is an absolute monster," while grabbing a fresh cold bottle of San Pellegrino. "Be very careful, Sarah," Rocco warned, pointing a sauce ladle in her direction for emphasis. "Dante Moretti is a very dangerous individual, but he operates by a certain code of honor. That woman, Vanessa, she has no code. She would destroy you for her own amusement. I heard a story that she had the valet fired last week simply because he adjusted his own rearview mirror while she was a passenger in the car." Sarah gave a slight nod, instinctively smoothing down her apron. This job was her lifeline. She desperately needed the income. She resolved to become invisible, to be nothing more than a ghost in the room. But ghosts have a way of seeing the things that the living desperately try to conceal. When Sarah made her way back to the table, the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like you could slice it with a steak knife. Vanessa was putting on a grand spectacle of her supposed disability. "My hand is cramping up again," Vanessa moaned loudly, holding up her left hand for Dante to see. It was the hand that bore the massive 10-carat diamond engagement ring. She massaged her wrist with dramatic flair. "The nerve damage from that terrible car accident, it is flaring up again. Dante, darling, you are going to have to cut my steak for me this evening. I can barely hold on to a fork." Dante let out a quiet sigh and took a sip of his wine. "You seemed perfectly fine at the gallery opening this morning, Vanessa." She snapped back instantly. "That was adrenaline. I was in agony the entire time. You just never listened to me." The doctor specifically told me that the nerves in my left hand are completely shredded. I have absolutely zero grip strength. If I happen to drop something, it is certainly not my fault. Sarah poured the water in complete silence. She kept her eyes on Vanessa's left hand. The fingers were adorned with a flawless manicure, resting limply upon the white tablecloth. "I will need a straw," Vanessa demanded next. She looked directly at Sarah. "I cannot lift the glass. It is my wrist, you see." Sarah responded softly. "I will get that for you right away." As Sarah began to turn away from the table, she witnessed something peculiar. Vanessa reached for her clutch purse with her supposedly injured left hand. It was an incredibly quick, almost violent motion as she snatched the bag and pulled it closer to her plate, as if she were trying to hide something inside it. The movement was fast and precise, not at all the fumbling motion of a person with shredded nerves and no strength. Sarah paused for just a fraction of a second, a small frown creasing her brow, before she continued on her way to the bar. Why would someone lie about a hand injury? Sarah understood that wealthy people often craved drama, but this felt different, more specific and calculated. By the time she returned with the straw, the appetizers had been served. It was carpaccio topped with delicate truffle shavings. "This smells absolutely rancid," Vanessa announced loudly, wrinkling her nose in disgust. She picked up her fork with her perfectly functional right hand and poked disdainfully at the thin slices of meat. "Dante, you must tell them to take this away. I want the lobster risotto instead, and you should tell the chef to chew it for me first, since you apparently view me as a complete invalid." Dante slowly rubbed his temples. "Vanessa, please, just try to eat something." "I cannot!" she exclaimed. She then dropped her fork onto the plate with a loud, jarring clatter. "My left hand is completely useless and my right hand is exhausted from carrying the weight of this entire relationship." It was a clear performance, a loud and vulgar display designed to humiliate Dante into complete submission. Sarah stood motionless beside a marble pillar, observing everything. She had been raised in a rough neighborhood in Queens. She had learned from a young age how to read body language with expert precision. She knew the subtle difference between genuine pain and a calculated act. Vanessa was not in pain. She was profoundly bored. And then, the first small crack in her carefully constructed facade appeared. A young busboy, a new hire named Leo, who had only started that week, was clearing the adjacent table. He was visibly nervous. As he turned, his elbow accidentally bumped the edge of Dante's table. A heavy ornate silver salt shaker teetered precariously on the edge of the tablecloth. For a moment, it seemed to hang in space before gravity took control. The shaker tipped over and began its fall directly toward Vanessa's expensive lap. The entire event happened in less than the blink of an eye. Vanessa's supposedly useless left hand shot out from beneath the napkin. Her reflexes were astonishing, like the strike of a cobra. She caught the heavy silver shaker in mid-air, just inches before it could make contact with her silk dress. Her grip on it was like iron. There was no tremor, no sign of weakness whatsoever. She had snatched it out of the air with the incredible precision of a trained fighter or a professional athlete. For one split second, Vanessa was completely frozen. She was holding the shaker firmly in her paralyzed left hand. Her fingers were wrapped securely around the cool metal. She slowly looked up from the shaker. Her eyes met Sarah's. At that moment, Sarah was the only person who had seen it happen. Dante was still looking down at his phone. The terrified busboy was apologizing profusely to the floor. Vanessa's eyes widened with pure, unadulterated panic, which then instantly transformed into a look of venomous, pure hatred. She knew, in that single instant, that the waitress had witnessed her perfect lie unravel. Very slowly, and with great deliberation, Vanessa placed the salt shaker back onto the table. She then allowed her hand to go limp once more, letting it flop onto her lap like a dead fish. "You clumsy, incompetent idiot," Vanessa shrieked, turning all her fury on the terrified busboy as a distraction. You almost ruined a $10,000 dress! Dante, you must fire him! Fire him this instant! Dante finally looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. It did not even touch you, Vanessa. He threatened my safety, she lied, her voice rising a full octave in fake hysteria. I am shaking. Look at me. I am trembling all over. She held up her right hand, shaking it theatrically for effect. But her left hand, the one that had just performed a miraculous catch, remained hidden from view under the table. It was then that Sarah stepped forward. She could not stand by and allow Leo to be fired over this. She knew he had 2 young children at home. Ma'am, Sarah said, her voice steady. Leo is extremely sorry. It was a complete accident. I saw the entire thing. Nothing touched you. Vanessa's head snapped towards Sarah with terrifying speed. Her voice was low and carried a clear threat that cut through the restaurant's quiet hum. You saw exactly what just happened here. Keep your mouth shut about what you witnessed, or I promise you, I will utterly destroy you. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, forcing herself to meet the woman's cold stare without flinching. I saw everything. A cruel smile spread across Vanessa's face, a smile that never reached her eyes. Is that a fact? She hissed. Well, since you are so very observant, why do not you go and fetch my main course? And bring me a new fork. This one is now dirty. She lifted the heavy, sharp silver steak fork, holding it out for Sarah to take. But instead of handing it over, she let it fall to the polished marble floor. Oops, Vanessa said, her voice now dripping with a fake sugary sweetness that was more chilling than her anger. What a clumsy hand I have. Now pick it up. Sarah stared down at the gleaming fork on the floor, then looked back up at Vanessa's triumphant face. This had nothing to do with a fork. It was a raw display of power, a command for total submission. But Sarah's mind was already racing, connecting the dots. Why would she pretend to have an injury like this? What was the purpose of this elaborate act? That is when she remembered the rumor Rocco had mentioned back in the kitchen, the one about a prenuptial agreement. If Vanessa could prove she was disabled before the wedding, a standard prenup could potentially be thrown out based on medical dependency. She could build a case that she was unable to work and could not possibly support herself. She was constructing a perfect trap for lifetime alimony, and the wedding ring was not even officially on her finger yet. The woman was not just difficult, she was trying to scam Dante Moretti himself. Sarah bent down, her knees almost touching the floor, to retrieve the fork. As her fingers reached for the cool silver, her eyes caught something else beneath the table. Vanessa had her legs crossed, and the skirt of her expensive dress had ridden up just enough. There, on Vanessa's supposedly bad left calf, a place normally hidden by long dresses, was a tattoo. It was small and the ink was faded, looking like the kind of art done in a prison. The symbol was unmistakable, a black widow spider captured inside a simple triangle. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that mark. She had seen that exact tattoo when she was growing up in Queens. It was not a cute sorority symbol. It was not some trendy fashion choice. That tattoo belonged to a dangerous and notorious group of female con artists known as the Widows, who operated out of New Jersey back in the early 2000s. They were infamous for marrying wealthy men, inventing severe medical problems, and then stripping them of every penny they possessed. Vanessa Sterling was not from some old money family. She was no high society debutante. She was a professional grifter, likely named Veronica Stiles, and Sarah had just stumbled upon the one piece of leverage that could bring her down. Sarah quickly retreated to the sanctuary of the back kitchen. Her hands were trembling, but not with fear. It was the pure adrenaline that comes with a shocking discovery. She burst through the swinging doors, leaving the quiet dining room for the humid chaos of the dishwashing area. The loud roar of the industrial sanitizing machines completely drowned out the smooth jazz playing for the patrons. She desperately needed to be certain. Finding a hiding spot behind a tall stack of drying crates, Sarah pulled out her old, cracked iPhone. Her fingers flew across the screen with purpose. She sent a text to her cousin Mike, a man who had served 5 years in Trenton State Prison and knew every single gang symbol on the entire East Coast. I need an ID on a tattoo. It is a spider inside a triangle. All black ink. Looks old. Who uses that? The three little dots of the typing bubble appeared almost instantly. He replied, "Stay away from that, Sarah. That is the Black Widows. A Jersey crew of female scammers. They only go after, oh, very rich guys. Why are you asking?" Sarah did not answer him. She felt a cold, hard knot tighten deep inside her stomach. So it was all true. Vanessa Sterling was not merely a spoiled and entitled socialite. She was a professional predator. The supposed nerve damage, the elegant cane, the dramatic displays of helplessness, it was all just a meticulously crafted part of a long-term con. If she successfully married Dante Moretti, she would likely divorce him within 6 months. She would claim his stressful lifestyle made her condition worse, and then walk away with half of his massive empire. Or even worse, she would wait until the ink on the marriage license was dry, and then carefully arrange a very tragic accident for her new husband. "Sarah," a voice barked. It was Mr. Ritchie, the manager, peering around the corner. "Table 4 is asking for you. They want you specifically. Vanessa claims she wants to apologize to you about that whole fork incident." A chill washed over Sarah, making her blood run cold. Apologize? Vanessa? That did not sound right. "I know," Ritchie whispered, nervously wiping his forehead with a folded handkerchief. "It is definitely strange. Just go out there, and for the love of God, please smile." Sarah straightened her apron and forced her feet to walk back out onto the floor. The shift from the hot, loud, and chaotic kitchen to the silent, velvet-draped dining room was like entering another world. When she finally approached the table, she could feel that the entire atmosphere had changed. Dante was not looking at Vanessa. He was staring deep into his wine glass, looking less like a powerful crime boss and more like a man trapped in a cage. Vanessa, on the other hand, was glowing with a false warmth. "There she is," Vanessa chirped sweetly. She reached out with her good right hand, patting the empty chair beside her as an invitation. "Come closer, my dear. I feel just terrible about dropping my fork earlier. It is my nerves, you understand. They just seem to misfire sometimes." Sarah took a cautious step closer, keeping her hands tightly clasped behind her back as a shield. "It is no trouble at all, Miss Sterling. Please, you must call me Vanessa," she purred. Then, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, so low it was almost lost beneath the clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables. "Lean in a little. I have a secret I want to tell you." Sarah hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming, before she leaned down just slightly. Vanessa turned her head toward her. The radiant smile disappeared from her face in an instant. It was replaced by a look of pure, dead-eyed aggression, like a shark about to strike. Her eyes bored into Sarah's with cold fury. "I saw you looking at my leg," Vanessa whispered, her voice completely stripped of the phony, sophisticated accent. It was raw and guttural now, a voice from the streets. "You think you are so smart, just because you grew up in the gutter? Let me tell you something. I own the gutter. If you open your mouth about anything you think you saw, I will not just have you fired. I will personally plant enough illegal substances in your locker to make sure you go to prison for 20 years. Do we have an understanding?" She then pulled back, and the dazzling, fake smile snapped back onto her face, as if it were a physical mask. "Oh, Dante, look at her. She is just so sweet. She forgives me." Sarah stood up straight, her heart pounding against her ribs like a terrified bird beating its wings against a cage. She looked over at Dante. He was watching Sarah intently, his dark eyes narrowed in thought. He had not heard the whisper, but he had definitely seen the sudden change in Sarah's posture. He saw the flicker of raw fear in her eyes. Get her a glass of champagne, Sarah, Dante said. His voice was commanding, but it lacked any real harshness, and you can also bring, the check. We are leaving early tonight. No! Vanessa slammed her good hand on the table, making the glasses jump. We have not even had our dessert yet. I ordered the soufflé. You know I need the sugar, Dante. My blood sugar gets dangerously low when I am in this much pain. Dante looked at his fiancée, his expression a weary mix of exhaustion and growing suspicion. You have been complaining about the pain all evening, Vanessa. Perhaps we should just go to the hospital. I do not need a hospital, she snapped back. I need my soufflé. Sarah slowly backed away from the table. I will go check on your dessert. As she walked away, she knew she was at a crossroads with a choice to make. She could just keep her head down, serve the stupid soufflé, and let Dante Moretti walk straight into a trap that could cost him everything, including his life. Or she could fight back. She thought about her father. He had been a good, honest man, a union carpenter who was completely destroyed by a loan shark. That man had used confusing fine print and a string of fake promises to steal their family home. She despised bullies. She despised liars. And at that moment, she truly, deeply hated Vanessa Sterling. She needed solid proof, something that was completely undeniable. She walked toward the kitchen, but instead of checking on the soufflé, she made her way to the security office. The door was unlocked. The night guard, an older man named Gus, was dozing in his chair in front of the wall of monitors. Gus, Sarah whispered, gently shaking his shoulder to wake him. Huh? What is it? Gus jumped in his seat, quickly adjusting his uniform cap. I need you to pull up the video feed from camera 3. It is the one right above the VIP section. I need the footage from about 20 minutes ago. Sarah, you know I cannot do that. Richie would have my head if he found out. Please, Gus, this is a matter of life or death. I am being completely literal. Gus looked at the sheer desperation on her face and let out a long, heavy sigh. He typed a password into the keyboard, and the screens flickered to life. Sarah quickly rewound the footage. And then, there it was, the salt shaker falling from the table, Vanessa's hand shooting out with lightning speed, the perfect catch, the brief freeze, the moment of horrified realization on her face. Holy cow, Gus breathed out, leaning closer. Did you just see that? Incredible reflex. That woman moves like some kind of ninja. Can you save that specific clip for me? Sarah asked, her voice urgent. I can put it onto a flash drive. But Sarah, if you actually use this, you are officially declaring war on the future Mrs. Moretti. You do understand who her fiancé is, do you not? I know, Sarah said, her eyes glued to the monitor. But just look at him. She pointed to the live feed from the dining room. Dante was sitting alone at the table, rubbing his temples while Vanessa stood and berated a young busboy over something trivial. He does not look like a happy man to me, Gus. He looks like a victim. Just as Gus was about to copy the video file, the door to the small security office swung open with force. It was not Mr. Ritchie, it was one of Dante's bodyguards who stood there. He was a mountain of a man named Enzo, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. He completely filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking any chance of an exit. Mr. Moretti wants the check now, Enzo rumbled, his voice low and gravelly. And the lady is asking where her waitress disappeared to. She says you have been gone for far too long. She is starting to think you are stealing something. Sarah felt her stomach plummet. Vanessa was already moving on to phase 2 of her plan, which was to completely discredit the only witness. I am coming right now, Sarah said, quickly stepping away from the monitors. She gave Gus a desperate look, silently pleading with him to save the tape. And then she followed Enzo back into the lion's den. The dining room was much quieter now than it had been earlier. Most of the pre-theater crowd had already departed, leaving behind only the serious late-night drinkers and the city's power brokers. When Sarah arrived back at table 4, she found Vanessa in the middle of a performance. She was crying crocodile tears. Huge, glistening teardrops were rolling dramatically down her perfectly powdered cheeks. "It is gone, Dante. It is gone," she wailed, clutching her bare wrist for effect. "What is gone?" Dante asked, his patience now visibly worn down to a thread. "My bracelet. The vintage Cartier bracelet you gave me for our 3-month anniversary. I had to take it off because it was chafing my wrist. You know how sensitive my skin is, and I placed it right here on the table, just next to the breadbasket, and now it has vanished completely." Dante scanned the empty surface of the table. It was bare, except for the wine glasses and the last remnants of their dinner plates. "Are you positive you did not put it in your handbag?" Dante asked, his voice flat. "I already checked my bag twice. It is not in there." Vanessa then pointed a trembling, accusing finger directly at Sarah. She took it. "She is the only other person who has been near this table. I saw her looking at it with envious eyes earlier tonight. She has been jealous of me this entire evening." The terrible accusation hung heavy in the silent air, thick as smoke. Every single head in the quiet restaurant slowly turned to stare. Sarah held her ground, refusing to look away from her accuser. "I did not touch your bracelet, Miss Sterling," she said, her voice even. "Liar!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Her performance was flawless. "Dante, you have to search her. Make Enzo search her right now. I am certain she has hidden it somewhere in her server's apron." Dante rose from his chair with a deliberate, almost lazy grace. He carefully buttoned the single button of his expensive suit jacket. His gaze moved from Sarah's defiant face to Vanessa's theatrical distress. "Enzo." Dante's voice was a low murmur, barely disturbing the air. The large bodyguard took a silent step forward. "Check the floor first," Dante commanded. "I want you to look everywhere, especially under the table." "You are taking her side," Vanessa gasped, one hand flying to the pearls at her throat in disbelief. "Dante, I am your fiancée. This little servant is a common thief, stealing from your own family, and you want to check the floor like she dropped a napkin. I do not make accusations against anyone without proof, Vanessa." Dante's response was as cold and sharp as ice. "Enzo, check the area now." Enzo clicked on a small, powerful flashlight and knelt, the beam cutting through the dim light under the heavy dining table. He methodically swept the light back and forth across the polished floor. "There is nothing here, boss. Absolutely nothing." Vanessa stood up, her weight pressing heavily on an ornate cane. "Well, if it is not on the floor, then it must be on her person. Search her pockets this instant. If you refuse to do it, I will call the police myself, right now." And that was the trap. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Vanessa had almost certainly palmed the bracelet and expertly slipped it into Sarah's apron when she leaned close to whisper that threat earlier. It was a textbook pickpocket maneuver, the classic bump and plant. If they searched her now, they would absolutely find it. Sarah would be arrested and sent to jail. Any testimony she had about Vanessa's miraculously healed hand would be dismissed as the ramblings of a convicted thief, and Vanessa would win everything. Sarah could feel the small, hard lump in her left apron pocket, a cold and foreign weight that had not been there moments ago. She was completely and utterly trapped. "Fine," Sarah announced, her voice surprisingly steady and clear. "You can search me, but we will not do it here in the manager's office with him as the only witness." "And why not here?" Vanessa challenged, a flicker of fear in her eyes that she might be humiliated in a different way. "No," Sarah said, her gaze locking directly with Dante's. "Because when you find nothing on me and I prove I did not steal your bracelet, I want to make certain you cannot claim that I dropped it on the floor somewhere to hide it from you." Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw the fire of defiance in her eyes, but he also saw something deeper, something rare. He saw her integrity. "My office," Dante decided without hesitation. "We will do this now." The walk to the manager's office felt like a grim funeral march down the long, carpeted hallway. Mr. Ritchie was practically hyperventilating, his face pale with anxiety. Dante moved with a quiet, lethal calm that was far more intimidating than any outburst. Vanessa limped beside him, a perfect picture of smug tragedy. Once inside the cramped office, Sarah stood directly in the center of the room, under the harsh fluorescent light. "Empty your pockets," Dante ordered her. Sarah slowly reached into her right pocket. She pulled out her order pad, a simple pen, and a wine key. She placed each item carefully on the corner of the desk. Then she moved her hand to her left pocket, the one that held the cold, heavy lump. She closed her fingers around the object. There was no doubt. It was the bracelet. She could feel the sharp edges of the diamonds against her skin. If she pulled it out now, her life as she knew it was over. But Sarah had learned a few tricks of her own. Growing up in Queens, her cousin Mike had taught her a thing or two about sleight of hand before he got sent away. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly. "Before I show you what is in this pocket, I need to ask Miss Sterling a question." "Just empty the pocket now," Vanessa hissed, losing her patience. "No," Dante interjected, his voice sharp. "Let her speak." Sarah kept her hand buried in her pocket, her fingers tightly gripping the diamond bracelet. "Miss Sterling, you claimed that you removed the bracelet because the metal was chafing your injured wrist. Can you tell us which wrist that was?" Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. "My left wrist, of course, the one that was injured in the accident. The metal was pressing on a damaged nerve and causing me pain." "And I assume you used your right hand to remove it?" Sarah continued. "Well, obviously," Vanessa snapped. "My left hand is paralyzed, as you well know." "So," Sarah said, her words slow and deliberate, "you are telling us that you unclasped a very complex Cartier latch, a mechanism that requires 2 fingers to pinch and a third to pull, using only the fingers of one hand. That is physically impossible unless you had someone to help you. Or," she added, "unless your left hand actually works perfectly fine." I, well, I used my teeth to help," Vanessa stammered, her story falling apart. "Then show us," Sarah challenged, her confidence growing. "Here is Mr. Ritchie's watch. Please put it on your left wrist, and then take it off using only your right hand and your teeth. If you can successfully do it, I will gladly empty my pocket for everyone. But if you cannot, then maybe you are lying about more than just a missing bracelet." A heavy silence fell over the small room. It was a massive gamble. Sarah was betting that Vanessa's overwhelming ego would not allow her to admit defeat, but that the simple laws of physics would make it impossible for her to succeed. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Vanessa shouted, turning to Dante for support. "Dante, make her stop this nonsense." "Do it, Vanessa," Dante commanded. His voice was no longer bored or detached. It was as cold and hard as steel. "If you are telling the truth, this should be a very simple task. Show me." Vanessa stared down at the cheap, worn watch that Mr. Ritchie was holding out. A dark red flush crept up her neck and over her face. "It is completely different from my bracelet," Vanessa cried, her voice cracking. "The Cartier clasp is much easier to open." "It is actually much harder," Dante corrected her flatly. "That bracelet has a double safety lock. I know this because I am the one who bought it for you." Dante then turned his cold gaze back to Sarah. "Empty your pocket." Sarah took one last deep breath. She pulled her hand out of her apron. For a split second, Vanessa smirked, anticipating the triumphant glint of diamonds. Sarah slowly opened her hand. It was completely empty. Vanessa's jaw fell open in shock. "What? But how?" "I put it, I mean, I am sure it has to be in there." "You put it where?" Dante asked, his voice dropping to a truly dangerous whisper. "What exactly were you about to say, Vanessa?" "You put it there yourself." Vanessa turned deathly pale. "No, that is not what I meant. I meant I saw her put it in there." "Search me," Sarah said, raising her arms to her sides. "Enzo, please go ahead." Enzo performed a quick, professional pat-down. "She is clean, boss." Sarah had used the oldest server's trick in the book. As she had walked into the office, she passed the large laundry bin sitting by the door. In one single fluid motion, perfectly masked by the turn of her body, she had expertly flicked. The drawer was completely bare. A cold dread washed over Vanessa, and her mouth fell open. How could this be? It was supposed to be right there. Her voice trembled as she stammered, "But I put it—" She stopped, realizing the terrible mistake she had just made. Dante's voice dropped to a low, menacing whisper right beside her ear. "You put it where exactly, Vanessa?" In that moment, he held all the power and she was trapped. Her entire body went cold. Panicked, she tried to reverse her words, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. "No, I mean, I saw her put it there." From across the room, Sarah simply lifted her hands in a gesture of calm surrender. "Feel free to search me," she said, her voice steady. "Enzo, please go ahead." Enzo performed a quick but thorough pat-down. He stepped back and announced, "She is clean, boss." Sarah had anticipated the setup. As she entered the office moments earlier, she had passed the large laundry bin. With a single fluid motion, hidden by the turn of her body, she had expertly tossed the planted item into the pile of linens, escaping the trap that had been laid for her. Justice does not always come from the powerful. Sometimes it comes from being smarter than those who want to hurt you. The diamond bracelet from her pocket, directly into the large pile of dirty linen napkins. It was an incredibly risky move, but she knew she had to get the damning evidence off her person. "It is not on her," Dante stated, his eyes fixed on Vanessa. "So, I will ask you again. Where is it?" She must have swallowed it," Vanessa said, grasping at the most absurd excuse. "Enough," Dante boomed. "Enzo, take Miss Sterling to the car." "You are just kicking me out?" Vanessa shrieked in disbelief. "Dante, I am supposed to be your fiancée." "Not yet, you are not," Dante said coldly. "Now go to the car. I have some business here that I need to finish." Vanessa shot Sarah a look of pure, unadulterated murder. She turned to leave and limped away, but in her fury, she completely forgot to use her cane for support. She took 4 perfectly normal steps toward the door before she realized her mistake. Then she dramatically stumbled and grabbed the doorframe for balance. Dante observed it all in silence. He did not say a single word until the office door clicked shut. Then he turned to Sarah. "You are very smart. Far too smart to be waiting tables for a living." "I need the tips," Sarah replied, her voice finally starting to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. "You did not take the bracelet," Dante said. It was a clear statement, not a question. "But you do know where it is, do not you?" "It is in the laundry bin over there," Sarah admitted quietly. "She planted it on me right after she whispered in my ear." Dante walked over to the bin and dug through the soiled napkins until he pulled out the glittering diamond bracelet. He held it up, watching it sparkle under the harsh office light. "Why?" Dante asked, his voice low. "Why are you doing all of this? You could have simply let her win this fight. Why risk so much to fight her?" "Because," Sarah said, her thoughts turning to her own father. "I do not like people who take advantage of the blind." Dante looked at her, his expression filled with confusion. "I am not blind." "Are you sure about that?" Sarah asked with sudden boldness. "She is a professional con artist, Mr. Moretti. That hand injury is completely fake. She is setting you up for a massive alimony payment after a very short marriage. She is not even Vanessa Sterling. That tattoo, the small spider on her leg, it is a known gang sign for a crew of grifters called the Black Widows." Dante became incredibly still. The very air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The Black Widows?" he repeated, the name tasting like poison. "Yes. My cousin recognized the style of the ink. She is not who she claims to be. And if you marry her, I promise you, she is going to take you for everything you have." Dante just stared at the diamond bracelet in his hand. He looked like a man who was waking up from a very long and very bad dream. "I am going to need proof," Dante said, his voice hard. Real, solid proof, not just a conveniently missing bracelet or a suspicious stumble. I have video, Sarah told him. There is security footage of her catching a falling salt shaker with her supposedly paralyzed hand. Gus in security has a copy of it. Dante gave a slow, deliberate nod. Get it for me. But before Sarah could even move, the office telephone rang with a shrill cry. Mr. Ritchie answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went completely white. It is the front desk, Ritchie stammered, his eyes wide with fear. The police are here. They said they received an anonymous tip that a waitress was selling drugs here in the restaurant. They have a warrant to search all of the employee lockers. Sarah froze in place. Vanessa. She had not only planted the bracelet, she had a devastating backup plan already in motion. My locker, Sarah whispered in horror. If they find anything at all in your locker, Dante said, his face grim, my influence will not be able to help you. Not with the police already involved tonight. The new commissioner is watching my every move. I did not do it, Sarah cried, tears welling in her eyes. I know you did not, Dante said. He glanced over at the window, then back at her. You need to leave right now, before they come back here to find you. You want me to run? Sarah asked, her voice filled with despair. If I run, I will look guilty. If you stay here, you are going to jail, Dante told her bluntly. She is always 2 steps ahead of you. You need to go and find out who she really is. Find me her real name. If you can bring me proof that she is a Black Widow, then I can handle everything else from there. Dante reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card with a private number embossed in gold foil. He pressed it firmly into her hand. Run, Sarah, and do not stop running until you have the truth. Sarah grabbed the heavy card. She could already hear the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of police boots echoing down the hallway. She did not hesitate for another second. She kicked off her uncomfortable work heels and sprinted out the back service door, disappearing into the cold, rainy alleyway. She left her job, her tips, and her entire old life behind her. The hunt was officially on. The broken neon sign of the Starlight Motel in Queens buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly, dying yellow light into the darkness of room 104. Sarah sat on the very edge of the sagging mattress. Her damp uniform was spread out over the radiator, slowly drying. She had not slept in more than 24 hours. She stared at the black business card Dante had given her. It felt like her one and only lifeline to a world she had just been forced out of, but she knew she could not call him yet. She could not call him without some real ammunition. A sudden, heavy knock on the door made her jump to her feet. She instinctively grabbed a cheap table lamp, holding it like a baseball bat. It is just me, a rough voice rasped from the other side of the door. It is Mike. Sarah quickly unlatched the door. Her cousin Mike slid inside, shaking cold raindrops from his worn leather jacket. He looked rougher than she remembered, with fresh scars on his knuckles and dark tattoos creeping up the side of his neck. But his eyes were still kind. He was carrying a thick manila envelope. You have really stepped in it this time, cuz, Mike said, tossing the heavy envelope onto the bed. The police were tearing Laura's life apart, piece by painful piece. They had discovered 1 ounce of pure cocaine carefully taped to the interior wall of her locker, and now her face was all over the news. They were calling her the waitress kingpin, a monster in an apron. She set me up, Sarah said, her voice like stone. She planted it there. I have to find out who she is, Mike. Please, you have to tell me you uncovered something. Mike slowly lowered himself into the chair across from her, his face a mask of grim concern. I called some old friends back in Jersey, he began. That tattoo you told me about? The spider inside the triangle? It's the mark of the widow's circle. He leaned forward. This is not a street gang, Sarah. It is a sorority for female sociopaths. He slid a manila envelope onto the table. Then, he carefully spread 3 printed mugshots across the worn surface. The pictures were old, grainy, and rendered in stark black and white. I want you to meet Veronica Stiles, Mike said, tapping his finger on the first photograph. The woman in the picture was younger, her dark hair pulled back simply, her face free of makeup, but her eyes were absolutely unmistakable. They were cold, empty, and predatory, like the eyes of a great white shark. She was arrested in 2018 for major fraud. The charges were dropped when the key witness vanished without a trace. Then, in 2020, she marries a tech chief executive officer in Seattle. He dies from a sudden heart attack just 3 months later. Naturally, she inherits his entire fortune. 2 years after that, in 2022, she marries a Texas oil baron. He conveniently falls off his yacht. She gets the massive insurance payout. Sarah reached out and picked up the photos. She changes everything, her appearance, her name, her entire life story. But the pattern never changes, Mike confirmed. She always marries men with immense wealth, and those men always end up dead. He pushed a medical report across the table. And this is the final piece. In every single case, the husband began to feel sick for weeks before he died. They all reported exhaustion, severe headaches, and growing confusion. The doctors wrote it off as stress, or maybe a persistent viral infection. But my contact is certain she uses digitalis, an extract from the foxglove plant. It systematically causes heart failure, and it is almost impossible to trace unless you are specifically looking for it. A wave of ice washed through Sarah's veins. She saw Dante at the restaurant in her mind, rubbing his temples to soothe a headache. She remembered the dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes and the passive way he allowed Vanessa to bully him. It was as if he no longer possessed the energy to defend himself. "He is not just tired," Sarah whispered, the realization dawning on her. "She is already killing him." Mike nodded grimly. If she is putting on this whole sick fiancé performance with the fake nerve damage, it provides the perfect alibi. When he finally dies, she gets to play the part of the grieving, helpless widow who needs his estate to survive her terrible disability. No one ever questions the poor widow. "When is the wedding taking place?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. Mike hesitated, his expression turning even darker. "That is the worst part. I checked all the celebrity gossip sites. After the so-called stress from the incident at the restaurant, the robbery by the waitress, Vanessa had a complete emotional collapse. She managed to convince Dante to move the entire ceremony up. They are planning a private signing of legal papers tomorrow evening at his huge estate in the Hamptons. She is calling it a healing ceremony." "Tomorrow," Sarah repeated, the word hanging in the air. She jumped to her feet, pacing the tiny motel room like a caged animal. If he signs those papers, he is a dead man. The moment she is legally his wife, she will pull the plug for good. "Sarah, you cannot possibly go there," Mike warned her, his voice firm. "Dante has a private army of security guards. The police are actively looking for you. If you set one foot on that property, you will either be shot or arrested on sight." "He showed me kindness," Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the business card he had given her. "He let me get away. He knew that something was deeply wrong, Mike. He just had no idea what it was. I need to show him this entire file." "You are a waitress from Queens," Mike said, his voice now gentle. "How in the world are you going to break into a Mafia fortress?" Sarah stopped her pacing. She stared at her own reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. The woman looking back at her no longer resembled a waitress. The fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp, and focused anger. "I am not breaking in," Sarah stated calmly. "It is a wedding, Mike, and all weddings need catering staff." The Moretti estate in the Hamptons was less of a private home and more of a heavily guarded fortress cleverly disguised as a modern palace. It was surrounded by high stone walls, massive iron gates, and teams of guards who patrolled the perimeter with earpieces firmly in place. Inside the bustling service entrance, the controlled chaos of event preparation was at its peak. A high-end catering company, Elite Events, was busy unloading trucks filled with enormous flower arrangements, intricate ice sculptures, and dozens of cases of expensive champagne. Sarah walked with purpose directly up to the supervisor, a woman clutching a clipboard. Sarah had dyed her hair a stark jet black in the motel bathroom sink and had pulled it back into a severe, tight bun. She wore a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and a stolen catering uniform she had lifted from a laundry service van 2 blocks away from the estate. "I am the agency replacement for the dishwasher," Sarah announced, her voice intentionally flat and completely bored. "They mentioned you were short on staff." The supervisor, a frazzled-looking woman wearing a communication headset, did not even bother to look up from her clipboard. "It is about time. Go grab an apron. I am putting you on glass polishing duty. Do not break a single thing, or I will deduct it from your very soul." And just like that, Sarah was in. The kitchen was a sprawling labyrinth of stainless steel countertops and shouting chefs. Sarah kept her head bowed low, meticulously polishing champagne flutes while her eyes darted around, scanning the entire room. She had to get to the main hall of the house. She had to find a way to get to Dante. "You, the new girl!" a chef suddenly shouted in her direction. "Take this tray of hors d'oeuvres to the library right now. The groom is in there meeting with his lawyers. Now move it." Sarah's heart nearly leaped out of her chest. This was her chance. She quickly grabbed the heavy silver tray, which was laden with smoked salmon blinis, and pushed her way through the swinging double doors. The main house was eerily silent compared to the noisy kitchen. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light, and the walls were lined with priceless oil paintings in ornate frames. Sarah carefully navigated the long hallways until she finally located the library. The massive, heavy mahogany doors were open just a crack. She could clearly hear voices coming from inside. "I simply do not understand the incredible rush, Vanessa," a deep voice rumbled. It was Dante's lawyer, a man named Mr. Giallo. "The prenuptial agreement has not been fully reviewed by your legal counsel. If you insist on signing the marriage license tonight, you will be waiving some very specific legal protections." "I do not care about the money," Vanessa's voice whined, a sharp contrast to the lawyer's tone. She was definitely in the room. "I just want to be his wife. My delicate health is deteriorating, Leo. The terrible stress of that waitress attacking me in the restaurant. I feel like my heart could just give out at any moment. I need to feel security. I need to know that Dante is mine." Sarah carefully peered through the narrow crack between the doors. Dante was sitting slumped in a large leather armchair near the fireplace. He looked absolutely terrible. His skin had a gray, unhealthy pallor, and his eyes were sunken and dark. He held a glass of scotch in one hand, but it was trembling noticeably. It was a real tremor, not a fake theatrical one like Vanessa's. Vanessa stood directly behind him, gently massaging his shoulders with her supposedly good hand. Her left hand hung uselessly at her side, theatrically wrapped in a fine silk bandage. "Just sign the papers, Dante," Vanessa cooed softly into his ear. "Then we can finally get some rest. You look so incredibly tired, my love. I made you a special cup of tea. It will help you sleep soundly." On the small table right next to Dante sat a steaming cup of herbal tea. Sarah knew with chilling certainty what was in that cup. One more dose, perhaps the final fatal dose. Dante reached for the pen on the table. He looked utterly defeated. "Fine," he sighed. "If it will finally stop all the arguing, give me the papers." Sarah knew she could not wait another second. There was no time to be subtle. She kicked the library door open with all her strength. "Do not drink the tea," she shouted, letting the tray of blinis fall from her hands. The heavy silver platter crashed onto the marble floor with a deafening metallic clang that echoed through the room. Dante jerked his head up, startled. The lawyer dropped his pen in shock. Vanessa spun around, her expression instantly twisting from surprise into pure, unadulterated fury. "You!" Vanessa shrieked at the top of her lungs. "Security! Get security in here now!" "She is poisoning you!" Sarah yelled, ripping the glasses from her face to reveal her identity. "Dante, you have to look at me. It is Sarah. The tea is laced with digitalis. That is the reason you have been so sick." Two enormous guards burst into the room from the hallway, grabbing Sarah firmly by both arms before she could get any closer to the table. "Get this lunatic out of my sight!" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. "She is the stalker, the drug dealer from the news. She is here to kill me." "Wait," Dante croaked out. He made an effort to stand, but his legs wobbled beneath him, and he sank back into the chair. Let her speak." "Dante, she is extremely dangerous," Vanessa pleaded, rushing to his side and physically blocking his view of Sarah. "She is completely obsessed with you. She just broke into our home. You have to let Enzo take care of her properly." Enzo, the head of security, entered the room with a calm demeanor. He looked at Sarah, then turned his gaze to Dante. "Boss?" Enzo asked, waiting for his orders. "Check the tea," Sarah gasped, struggling against the powerful grip of the guards. "Test the tea and check her leg for the tattoo. Ask her about her husband who died in Seattle, and ask her about the oil baron who fell from his yacht." Vanessa's face went white as a sheet for a split second, but she recovered with incredible speed. "She is raving like a complete madwoman. Just look at her. She is high on her own drug supply." Vanessa then snatched the cup of tea from the table. "You think this is poison? Fine, I will drink it myself. I will drink it right now to prove that this piece of trash is lying." She confidently lifted the cup to her lips. Sarah stopped struggling against the guards. She watched Vanessa with intense focus. Vanessa tilted the cup. She took what appeared to be a sip. Then she slammed the cup back down on the table. "See?" Vanessa sneered with contempt. "It is just chamomile tea. Now get her out of here and call the police immediately." Dante looked over at Sarah, and the glimmer of hope that had been in his eyes completely faded away. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. "Sarah, why?" he whispered. "I am sorry, Mr. Moretti," Enzo said, placing a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I have to secure the premises now." Sarah was dragged backward out of the room. As she was pulled away, she watched Vanessa smirk, a tiny, triumphant curl of her lip. But Sarah had noticed something crucial. When Vanessa had pretended to sip the tea, her throat had not moved. She had not actually swallowed. She had faked the entire thing, just like she faked the injured hand, just like she faked all of her love. Sarah was thrown out of the library and then dragged forcefully down the long hallway. "Wait!" Sarah shouted desperately to Enzo. "Check her pocket. I am telling you, she did not swallow the tea. She either spit it back into the cup or she is still holding it in her mouth. Enzo, please, listen to me. You know me. I returned the diamond bracelet. You know I am not a thief." Enzo hesitated for a moment. He had personally witnessed the incident with the bracelet. He knew Sarah possessed integrity, and he also knew that Dante had been getting progressively sicker ever since Vanessa had moved into the estate. "Hold her right here," Enzo commanded the other guards. "What are you doing?" one of the guards asked him. "I am going to check the tea," Enzo grunted. But before he could take a single step back toward the library, a piercing scream echoed from inside the room. "Dante! Oh my God, Dante!" Enzo and the guards immediately ran back, dragging a struggling Sarah along with them. Inside the library, Dante was slumped over on the floor beside his chair, his body convulsing violently. A white foam was forming at the corners of his mouth. "He is having a heart attack," Vanessa wailed, standing over his body and wringing her hands together in a display of grief. Both of her hands. "I told you all this stress would kill him. He is dead. Someone call 911. Sarah broke free from the grip of the distracted guard and rushed over to Dante's side. She pressed her fingers to his neck to check his pulse. It was faint and thready, but it was there. "He is not dead," Sarah said urgently. "But he will be if we do not get him help right now, unless we neutralize the poison." "Get back," he ordered. Vanessa flew at Sarah, all pretense of her injury gone, her cane forgotten on the floor. She slammed into Sarah with a shocking amount of force, a strength born of pure desperation. Sarah stumbled backward, her equilibrium lost. Her hand shot out to steady herself, landing on the ornate dinner cart that was still in the room. Her fingers instinctively wrapped around the cold, heavy steel of a utensil, a silver dinner fork. She stared at Vanessa, who now stood guard over Dante's body. The woman was an impenetrable wall, blocking the guards, blocking any chance of help. She was simply letting him die. In that moment, she was absolute power, an unstoppable force, a perfect black widow in the center of her web. But even the deadliest spider has a breaking point. Sarah scrambled back to her feet, the fork now a solid weight in her trembling hand. Her first instinct was to attack, but that was a fool's game. Stabbing Vanessa would only get her shot by the guards. She had to dismantle the woman's power, not challenge it with force. She needed to shatter the illusion for everyone to see. "Hey, Veronica!" Sarah's voice boomed, using the name she remembered from the faded mugshot. The effect was immediate. Vanessa went rigid, her head snapping up with a jolt. Catch! Sarah did not aim for Vanessa's chest or arm. She aimed directly for her face. It was a fast, deliberate throw, the silver fork spinning through the air like a weapon. This was a test of reflexes. An invalid, a truly frail woman, would only have time to flinch before it hit. But a deadly con artist, one with the reflexes of a predator, would act. Vanessa's supposedly paralyzed left hand shot up with lightning speed. It was a pure, primal instinct, a survival reflex she could not suppress. Her fingers closed around the fork just inches from her left eye. The catch was flawless. Her grip was firm, like a soldier holding a knife. Her arm was rock steady. A profound silence fell over the entire room. Every person in that library stared. There stood Vanessa, the crippled, helpless fiancée, holding a dinner fork in a perfect combat grip with her supposedly dead hand, all while standing over the dying body of the Don. Enzo saw it. The family lawyer saw it. Every single guard saw it. The horrifying reality of her mistake crashed down on Vanessa. She stared at the fork in her hand, then looked up at the room full of men with guns. "Uh-oh," Sarah breathed, the words barely a whisper in the deafening stillness. The suffocating silence held for maybe 3 seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. Vanessa was a statue, frozen in her perfect defensive stance, with the silver fork clutched in her paralyzed hand. "Adrenaline!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice a high-pitched, cracking sound of pure panic. She threw the fork to the floor as if it had seared her flesh. It was a miracle. The shock of it all, it must have woken up my nerves. "Save it," Enzo growled, his voice low and dangerous. He drew his pistol, but he did not aim it at Sarah. He leveled it directly at Vanessa's heart. "Step away from the boss," he commanded. "Enzo, have you lost your mind?" Vanessa cried, backing away with her hands raised in a gesture of false innocence. "I am his fiancée. That waitress is the real threat here." "I saw the catch, Vanessa," Enzo stated, his eyes cold as ice. He carefully stepped between her and Dante's struggling form on the floor. "And I saw you fake that sip of tea earlier. You never actually swallowed." Enzo reached down and picked up the teacup Vanessa had placed on the table. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. "Bitter almonds," he announced to the room, "and you are still standing." "He is having a heart attack!" Vanessa screamed, desperately pointing at Dante, who was now gasping for breath on the Persian rug. "He needs a doctor right now, not this ridiculous interrogation. Call the medics," Enzo barked to one of his men. "And put cuffs on her now." "Do not you dare touch me," Vanessa snarled, her voice dropping to a vicious growl. The elegant mask was finally gone, her beautiful face twisted into an expression of pure, unrestrained rage. She reached into a garter belt hidden beneath her gown, not for a handkerchief, but for a small, sharp ceramic knife she had successfully hidden from the metal detectors. She lunged forward, but not at Enzo. He was too large, too prepared. She went for Dante. Her plan was simple. If she could not marry him for his fortune, she would finish the job and claim he died before any help could arrive. No. Sarah threw herself forward without a second thought. She had no weapon, only the tools of her trade. She grabbed the heavy silver serving tray from the cart and swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The tray connected with the side of Vanessa's head with a sickening clang. The small ceramic knife flew from her hand and skittered across the polished floor. Vanessa collapsed to the carpet, a silent heap of designer fabric, looking like a broken doll. "Nice swing," Enzo muttered, calmly holstering his pistol. He dropped to his knees beside Dante. "Boss, you have to stay with us. The medics are just 2 minutes out." Sarah was already on her knees next to him. Dante's face was ashen, his skin cold and damp. "He needs oxygen," she said, her voice steady as she worked to loosen his tie. "We have to keep him awake." Dante's eyelids fluttered. His gaze drifted from the ornate ceiling down to Sarah's face. He looked at the unconscious form of Vanessa, then his eyes found Sarah's again. "You," Dante wheezed, his voice a fragile whisper. "You came back for me." "I did not finish my shift," Sarah replied, managing a small, watery smile as tears began to stream down her face. Someone to clear the table. 2 weeks later, the bold headline of the New York Post screamed across every newsstand: "Black Widow caught in web. Mafia fiancé exposed as serial killer." Sarah sat on a quiet park bench in Central Park, reading every word of the article. The police investigation had uncovered a mountain of evidence. They found a vial of digitalis hidden in Vanessa's vanity case. They discovered expertly forged medical records. Most damning of all, they found the passports of 3 previous husbands, all of whom had died of sudden heart failure. Veronica Stiles, who also went by the name Vanessa Sterling, was heading to prison for the rest of her life with no chance of parole. Sarah carefully folded the newspaper. She was finally free. The false charges against her had vanished the moment Enzo provided the security footage from the restaurant. But that freedom came at a price. She was now unemployed, completely broke, and officially homeless after checking out of her cheap motel room that morning. She watched the crisp autumn leaves drift down from the trees, wondering if Laura might ever give her job back. It seemed unlikely. "I have always preferred the view from my terrace," a familiar voice said. Sarah's head snapped up. A sleek black town car was parked at the curb. Dante Moretti was standing there, leaning on a cane, a real one this time. As he recovered from the lingering effects of the toxin, he looked noticeably thinner, but the healthy color had returned to his face. He was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, looking less like a powerful mafia don and more like a man who had been granted a second chance at life. "Mr. Moretti?" Sarah said, quickly getting to her feet. "I am so glad to see you are okay." "Dante," he corrected her gently. He walked toward the bench and gestured for her to sit down again. "Please." Sarah sat back down. "I owe you an apology," Dante began, his voice serious. "And a thank you. You saved my life, Sarah. You did it twice. Once with a simple bracelet, and once with a dinner fork." "I just did what anyone would have done." Sarah shrugged, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "That is a rare quality in my world," Dante said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I am aware you lost your job because of this. I know you lost your apartment. This is a check. It is enough for you to buy a house or a restaurant or whatever you want. It is yours. No questions asked." Sarah stared at the envelope. It was heavy with possibility. "I cannot take this. It is not charity," Dante insisted, his tone firm but kind. "Think of it as a severance package for the best and bravest waitress I have ever had." Sarah hesitated for a long moment. "I do not want your money, Dante. I want to feel safe. I want a job where I do not have to constantly look over my shoulder." A small smile touched Dante's lips. "I recently fired my head of security at the main office. He somehow missed a woman smuggling in a ceramic knife. I need someone new, someone observant, someone who notices the little things that everyone else misses. Someone who is not afraid to throw a serving tray at a killer." Sarah let out a surprised laugh. "You want to hire me?" I do not know the first thing about security. You knew more than Enzo did that night, Dante countered. The job pays 6 figures, it has full benefits, and I can promise you this. The napkins are very soft. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. She saw past the reputation, past the suit and the power. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had been so lonely that he almost let a monster into his life. She took the envelope from his hand and gently handed it back to him. Keep the money, Sarah said with newfound confidence. I will take the job. Dante extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Sarah. As their hands shook, the sun finally broke through the autumn clouds, casting a bright light on the silver head of the cane in Dante's hand. This was not some fairy tale ending. This was real life, which is often messy and complicated. But sometimes, in real life, the good guys actually win. And that is the story of how a simple dinner service brought down one of the most clever and dangerous con artists in modern history. Vanessa Sterling was convinced she could act her way into a massive fortune. But she made a fatal error. She forgot the most important rule of all. You can lie to the boss, but you can never, ever lie to the staff. Sarah did not just save one man's life. She proved that the most powerful weapon in any room is not always a gun. Sometimes it is a silver fork and a pair of eyes that are willing to see the truth. This story teaches us something profound. Never underestimate the people you consider beneath you. The waitress you ignore might be the one who saves your life or exposes your darkest secrets. It reminds us that true character is revealed not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we treat the invisible, the servers, the cleaners, the people who can give us nothing in return. And for those of you who have ever felt small, unseen, or powerless, remember Sarah. Your ability to notice what others miss, to stay observant when no one is watching you, that is your greatest strength. The world needs people like you. If you enjoyed this story of justice being served ice cold, please do us a favor and hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow and reach more people like you. Be sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss a new story. And I want to know, tell me in the comments below, have you ever caught someone in a major lie just by paying close attention to their body language? This content was carefully researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and inspiration. Every story we share is designed to touch your heart and remind you of your own strength. Thank you for being part of our community.